So let's go into another thing. So we did the end of the show. We were trying to wrap up that whole argument about the Worthington's Law, wealth and poverty, right? But wealthy does not necessarily equal better than, like a lot of people believe, right? Like your wealth is a sign of your intelligence or success. And we were looking at the Money Guy show, and I'm just going to show this clip real quick, and I want to clarify what our argument was because I think it got confused by a lot of people. It's the Money Guy show, and they're going to talk about a clip where a guy's talking about Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey's a freaking moron. But he's a genius for poor people who don't have discipline. If you don't want to become wealthy, follow Dave Ramsey. If you just want to save your money and die poor, and you have no self-discipline, be poor. Follow Dave Ramsey and be poor. And the reason I say that is he says pay cash for everything, don't have any debt, and that's what I grew up with. Like if you can pay off your house, can you imagine paying off your house, not having a mortgage payment? That's the stupidest thing you could ever do. Can you imagine paying cash for a car? How cool would it be to pay? No, that's terrible. It's a terrible financial decision.
We're in a society now where it seems like extremes rule everything. That's all that's on air. That's all that seems that works. But that's not the reality of life. I mean, I will say Dave is definitely on one side of, hey, let's get rid of all the debt as fast as possible. But then I would say they're on the other side, which is saying, never pay off your debt. Take advantage of the low interest rates and go invest it, and you'll.
Okay, so I'm not saying that they're being deceitful in any way, intentionally, but it is sort of deceitful, and anybody can sort of be deceitful without lying, right? For example, Lacey could say something like, well, 10 years ago, when Obama became president, I could go, well, wait, Lacey, he became president back in 2008, started in 2009. It was more than 10 years ago. And you'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. But what I was going to say, I'm like, whoa, you're just going to skip past that? You don't even know when he became president, right? I'm not lying, but what I'm implying here is that Lacey doesn't know what she's talking about, which isn't necessarily true. So I'm being deceitful to try and formulate an argument. The other way you can do it is by omission, right? Like if a guy is cheating on his wife and comes home late from work, she's like, what were you doing? He's like, well, I had some things to do around the office. It's not a lie. It's just not the whole truth, right? So he's being deceitful by omission. So
great example. Great example.
Right, but I'm just saying. But that's the problem, and that was the problem we're trying to make with this concept of wealth is somehow a status of your intelligence or your ability, right? How smart you are, how good you are as a person, all that stuff. That gets conflated a lot, and especially in American society, right? So the TikToker's making a point, okay? If you're poor and you're paying off all your debts, that could be detrimental is kind of the point he's making, to make it real simple, right? And he's saying that's stupid, and that's his argument. Now, we could argue back and forth, but here's the deal. If you're paying your debts, there's only 4 things you can really do. I mean, forgetting consolidation or refinancing, there's 4 things. You can either not pay it, in which case, like in a mortgage, it's going to go into foreclosure. So I don't think he's suggesting that. I'm positive he's not suggesting that. You can pay less than the amount you owe every month, in which case you're kind of in the same boat. I don't think he's suggesting that, right? So let's take those 2. So there's only 2 things he could possibly be suggesting. One is you either pay the amount you owe every month, or you pay more than that to pay it off sooner. Dave Ramsey, we know, will tell you pay more to pay it off sooner. He always does. It's in his books, right? So
right. It's the basis of his platform.
Exactly. The guy's point, though, is if you're poor and you're paying off sooner, you're putting more cash into it, you're going to bleed out your cash reserves, and you're not going to have any savings for when you get older, because you're not going to be able to throw as much cash at it and pay it down as quickly. Plus, you can also make an argument that if you saved, they'd have more money, and they would. The other thing about being poor is if you're in an emergency, you don't make enough money to make up for things quickly. So if you don't have savings to protect you, you're in a lot of trouble. Somebody gets sick, you lose your job, which is much more likely when you're lower middle class. You know, you get disability because a lot of people who are lower middle class work physical jobs, right? So if you're throwing all your extra cash at the debt and not saving any of it, you have no emergency. That was the point.
Which in turn is likely to rack up the debt again anyway.
Well, and even worse.
Right. You'll rack up more debt when you were trying to get out of debt.
Right. Now, I'm not saying Brian Preston here is being intentionally deceitful. My point was that if the thought process permeates, right, even in the financial industry where somebody as educated as he is, where he skips past that point, well, we're talking about two different types of things. This guy's not making a in-depth analysis about financial planning. He's just saying if you're poor and you're throwing all your cash at the debt, your extra money, you have no security. Right? It's kind of the argument that was being made. It wasn't being made well, but it was the argument.
And it sounded to me like the money guys were, if I understood them correctly, suggesting that what he was saying, the TikToker, was on an extreme opposite of Dave Ramsey. And I'm not sure that he really was being extreme. We haven't heard enough of what that particular person's platform is to know for sure, but no. I didn't necessarily think that he was saying not to give any attention to paying off debt or paying it off early. Like, I don't
Right.
think he said that, at least not in the part we listened to.
No.
I think he was kind of trying to highlight the idea that you just mentioned about, if you give all of your attention to paying off debt and do not create an emergency savings in the process or do anything toward retirement, to lose all of that time and don't have an emergency savings, about like how that would be detrimental. I feel like that was, what he was maybe trying to highlight, which isn't necessarily taking such an extreme position.
No, and I think it's a very simple argument that's pretty bulletproof. I mean, it's just a fact. If you're lower income, right? What happens though is when you get to Brian Preston gets to it, he ignores the income spectrum completely. And he just goes, well, you could do it either way, but that only applies if you're upper middle class or higher and you make good money. So what he said isn't untrue. It's very true. It is a spectrum. I mean, you could pay it off early or not. It's kind of going to be a fairly nominal difference, right? If you're wealthy.
Right, and let's also be honest that between those 2 points, there's a whole range of degree of paying it off early, right? So take a 30-year fixed, you decide to purchase a home in your mid-40s and you say this is a 30-year fixed, so 30 years, if I really pay it off over 30 years, I'm already in my mid-70s by that time. I don't really want that to be my situation. I definitely want to pay it off early. Now, there's the person who's like, I'm going to pay this thing off in 10 years, and there's the person who's like, I just want to make sure I pay it off by the time I'm in my mid-60s.
Right. But
so there's a whole range of how much you're trying to pay off debt, how quickly.
Right, but the problem...
So it's not just you're doing it early or you're not doing it early. That's my point.
Well, the problem I have with that analysis even is that you're ignoring what the person's income is. You're ignoring the person's situation, which is what he does, where he's like, well, it could be either way and it really depends and you got to factor risk and stuff. It's like, that's not untrue. But what he's not doing is acknowledging, yeah, but if you're poor and you're listening to Dave Ramsey, it's probably detrimental, which is that guy's point. If you're listening to that strategy and you're poor, it's probably going to hurt you, right? It puts you at a lot more risk. But he can't go against Dave because he wants to, they have a relationship with Dave, right? But he can't, so he doesn't acknowledge the poor thing. Now, I'm not saying he does it intentionally to be deceitful, but what ends up happening is he ignores the argument and goes into, well, it's really a range if we take in all people, which wasn't the argument. And that was my point. And that's why it gets convoluted, because he's not acknowledging the actual problem. He's just ignoring it and going somewhere else. So that was my whole argument with that. And people can, yell and scream at us later about how bad our analysis was of that conversation. But getting into, we're just going to wrap up real quick with that, with